Planning an event and wondering how you can give your attendees the best experience possible? Take advantage of customized meetings with Hilton that make it easier than ever to incorporate health, wellness, and great breaks. Hilton will help you build an extraordinary meeting that attendees will remember. To book your next meeting or event, go to meetings.hilton.com.
Are you followers?
Okay, so we're gonna probably add.
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
Hi, David.
Hey, Beth, here we are, another GatherGeeks podcast.
The Sparking Change series continues today with our guest, Ron Bracco. He is Vice President of Events for the DC area production agency Hargrove. And you've seen Hargrove's work if you've ever watched a presidential inauguration, for instance, any of them, Republican or Democrat, since, Truman, David?
Oh, yeah.
Quite some time. So they have also been covered in BizBash for their work on global summits, massive trade shows and conferences, nonprofit galas, and this is the type of gala that will take over a convention center. So this gives a scale of the work that they do. David, not all of our listeners are planning the G8, so what can they get out of this conversation?
Well, I think that we really realize that people are people, that no matter whether you're planning the G8 or you're planning your neighborhood event or you're planning a business event, that you have to treat people the same way, and that there's maybe a little bit more formality around a G8, but it's still a similar thing in terms of the customs, in terms of how people connect and relate to each other. In fact, protocol is really a way to understand the neuroscience of events in many cases, because if you look at many of the rules around who sits where and what side, if you're on the right side, because your ears are stronger on a certain side than the other side. So there's a lot of biochemistry or bio things that happen that are really part of protocol.
Ron is going to talk about how event design contributes to the theater and scale of large-scale diplomatic events, the pacing of events, and some practical considerations related to security and timelines when you're working with your client. So there's a lot to dig into, so let's listen.
So, Ron, welcome to this special Sparking Change edition of GatherGeeks. Alex and I are going to be doing the honors here today.
Great to have you with us, Ron.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
So we want you to explain. I know Hargrove. I grew up here in Washington, D.C. We're at the Meridian Center, International Center, it's actually called, in this beautiful setting. But I grew up in Washington, and I remember Hargrove from the early days of Washington, where Mr. Hargrove did all the inaugurals, and he did scenic things, and I see backdrops of the Capitol. I mean, it's come a long way, baby, right? So tell us a little bit about the Hargrove phenomenon and how it fits into the world.
Well, thank you. I'm very honored to talk about it. Hargrove is an 80-year-old company that has done every presidential inaugural since Truman. And we say that line very, very easily, but we're a company that has grown immensely over the past few years, and we touch on so many aspects of the event industry. So Mr. Hargrove started the company with his father, and they began the company by actually doing window displays. And when President Truman needed a float for his parade, Mr. Hargrove stepped up and said, I can do this.
How did he he ran into Mr. Truman, President Truman, on the street?
No, he actually knew enough people, like anything with Mr. Hargrove. People knew Mr. Hargrove and knew that he would be the person who would answer the question and answer and provide that service. And that's really how the company's grown. We talked about this earlier. It's the event industry. We've always been there for our clients. Every one of us as event professionals have always been there for our clients, fulfilling the needs, asking the questions, making sure that their objectives are met, and always stepping up and providing that service. And he did it way back when, recognized that beyond floats, there was an event company behind it. One of our first clients was the World Bank IMF meetings, and we would travel all over the world setting the stage for those meetings. He recognized that there was an industry. He was contemporaries with Jack Morton and George P. Johnson, and saw that there was a need here in Washington. And what's exciting about the company is that we are a company of protocol and prestige and swags and official pomp and circumstance, but we're also an innovative company that thinks in terms of what our clients need and what's the ever-changing industry and the evolution of engagement. And
so,
we're excited to be a part of that.
And you are basically a company that is responsible for some of the biggest events in the world, let alone when we talk about sparking change, you need to be the constant spark of change in order to accommodate these types of events. Tell us a little bit about sort of the grand picture of what you guys have been doing in modern days.
Oh, absolutely. Well, within the last 15 years, we've worked very closely with the U.S. State Department and setting the stage for every large international summit that the State Department have hosted, State Department and the White House. And so this was started with essentially with the G20 summit in Pittsburgh in 2009, all through NATO, through G8 meetings, through AIPAC, where it expanded 4 different cities across the U.S. We've worked with the past administration and with this administration on the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. We're servicing the event both here in Washington as well as Nairobi, Kenya, and Hyderabad, India. So it's really that opportunity to work very closely with the State Department in sizing what the needs are for that event and setting the stage.
And I'm curious, as part of the calculus for this, when you have such big events and public events and widely viewed events beyond the guest list, how this is perceived and how this is seen. And in a sense, is the audience who is watching this, whether that's through the internet or through cable TV or what it might be, are they part of the guest list too for this and part of the intended audience as well?
In the case of the Global Summit, it's all about the camera shot. So what you see when the president speaks, what you see in the environment when the press does a spray of the meeting room, and that is the audience. The audience that the press team while working for the State Department and White House is thinking about is the audience that is that 5 minutes that they're going to capture on the nightly news. Beyond that, it's the audience, both from the leader's perspective as well as the delegations, how they move through the space, what are the security requirements behind that, what has been captured in other markets and other countries, and how do we improve upon that?
What is the biggest, give us a sense of scale. Like when you do a G8, it's not just 8 people getting around a table.
No.
What does that look like?
No, from a G8, it's generally it's the leaders, it's several ministers that follow along, and a delegation of anywhere from 10 to 25 per leader, and then beyond that, it's also all the security detail behind that, the Secret Service, diplomatic security, as well as then the media beyond that. So for a G8, the most recent one that was hosted in the United States was at Camp David. That was a large delegation for those 8 leaders. There were probably close to 1,000 bodies connected to the project and had some sort of role. In the case of NATO, which was hosted in Chicago at the same time in 2012, just 3 days apart, that took over the entire city, the entire McCormick Place, in which there were 2,000 members of the press alone that came in for that event. And so it becomes a massive undertaking.
So what does your team look like? And how do you not get to sleep for days at a time in order to accommodate this crazy stress?
We love that kind of stuff. That's delicious work that we enjoy being a part of. It's all hands on deck for most significant projects that we have at Hargrove, but it means ramping up the teams. It's production company. It's AV companies of nearly 200 technicians coming in to install that job. Our own union crews will match that pretty easily. So it's a massive undertaking.
And so to take us through the planning process of that, it doesn't start 2 weeks before either.
No, but the very first summit that we did in 2009, there were roughly about 3 months to actually plan that event. And the second summit which was the nuclear security summit in 2010, I think the White House purposely kept the window short and brief. There's a sweet spot on timing for events. Too much time can delay decisions, slow the process down, and also increase costs. The briefer the window, to make sure you have enough time, but the briefer the window, you'll find efficiencies.
And what is the optimal time for different
90
use
days.
cases?
90 days for a large scale summit. Yes.
90 days. You can do something. You can pull it off in 90 days.
We've done it in less, but yes.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what ideally.
Absolutely.
And then what happens on day one of the 90-day planning versus what happens, of course, a week before or 2 weeks before? Like, what is sort of the big milestone?
Day one is always a development of the scope of work, fleshing out a floor plan, understanding the movements of the press and the leaders and the delegations, understanding the politics behind the placement of everything, and that will go on for 2 to 3 weeks, and it's concurrent with that is also the design process, budgeting process, vetting the concepts, branding.
And then, so the bigger picture point is, so you're in 90 days. What's the next big milestone that you sort of have a deadline for? Is it a presentation to the people, or is it ongoing, constantly?
Yeah, generally you're presenting to the interested parties or the stakeholders within the first 2 weeks, a design concept, first renderings. Sometimes that's even in advance of day one if it's a bid situation. And then it's moving all throughout the process, updating designs, changing designs. New stakeholders come into the mix. They want different requirements. But a hard date for us would be 2 weeks out. We will have designed, chosen graphics, selected graphics, set elements in stone, because we're installing at that point.
But then I guess there's the production side of it, but if you handle the entire event, then you're outsourcing to a lot of other people. So I assume you do both, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you'll have hundreds of partners and some events,
We
right?
try to minimize it, but yes, certainly 24 partners, easily.
What are the sort of the big buckets of those partners?
Technical is one of them. Simultaneous interpretation, floral elements, security barriers, security requirements, things like that. Furniture vendors.
And when you're working with so many partners in unison, how do you keep it all aligned to a clear central purpose, right? Like, what are some of the challenges of making sure that everyone is moving not just towards what works for them or lets them work in maybe a limited time frame like that, but what is actually best for the end result? How do you keep that aligned?
Like in regards to like vendors?
Yeah, or vendors, partners, clients, and when you have a lot of stakeholders who you're keeping moving towards a purpose that is greater than the sum of any one.
Sure.
How do you pull this thing off? Is the real question. Like it seems daunting. You have to have some sort of process that is unique, or at least it's thought out.
It's a great question. In the case of 2009 Pittsburgh Summit, it was really one of the first big summits that we had done in a few years, and it was the first time that we were a general contractor providing all those services. So there was a little bit of like ramping up, getting a grasp on the work, chartering new ground in a lot of ways, and so it was constant logistics, constant questions, constant checking off. For our process, we actually in those particular years, we would actually build a set in our facility and have the White House and the State Department come out and actually see the other sets, understand how the principals would move through it. Now, on the higher message, there's an objective, there's a look, there's a feel, there's a messaging in how we designed that piece, and it was all driven by the White House. What do we want to accomplish? 2009 in Pittsburgh, there was a desire to be as sustainable as possible. So we built a table that was all recycled materials. We used as much as possible reusable materials. The furniture that was rented for that particular event was all made with an eye on ecological and green methods. So the way it was, the way that chrome was chromed to the metal was all thought through and to be as environmentally friendly as possible. So those kind of messages carried through for everything that we did. That top line message of here's what we're trying to achieve, and knowing that we had to activate on that.
So shifting over to people and guests now, because ultimately all of this is for people.
Yeah.
With people at the events, what are some of the details that you think really stand out to people, or that really make a difference and help put them in the mood to be receptive to change or be receptive to new ideas?
It's the environment. It's creating the environment that opened up dialogue, that gave you a sense of space. There is so often a designer might like lean towards the cool kind of modern look or whatever it is, but if you can design a space that actually gives a sense of where you are in the environment, what's the bigger purpose, what's the message, so and what's the space in between. We could have used a third less of the convention center in Pittsburgh to execute the meetings, but by allowing space, large hallways, large meeting spaces, lounge spaces, there was those environments where people could come out of their secluded delegation offices and actually be in an environment where everyone was one. So humanity to the
this
space.
humanity theme has come across in everything we're talking about in these series of interviews. And so do you get the help of neuroscience and other disciplines that are not what a traditional event organization would think about? I know that you do in terms of audience control and things like that.
No, we hire really smart people. And when we approach design, we don't think about pieces and parts and scenic. We like to think from perspective of what's that environment we're creating from a feeling aspect, from an impact certainly, but and the necessity of why this needs to be here. But it's larger than that.
What about the idea that a temporary structure impacts people having the willingness to spark change? Is there something like you go into a house, you're used to like a house with the same decor over and over again, but you go into a temporary structure and it does something to your brain to say, okay, something new is happening. Is that part of the strategy of like when you create these sets? Is that figured into it?
Yeah, subconsciously, I would say that it does. You match the scale of what you design to the impact of the event and the message that is required. I mean, we approach and what is required. So when we approach a minister's meeting, there's business that needs to be done. The same business, essentially, just on a slightly lesser level. But the degree of build out is certainly less than it would be on a presidential level.
So there's a pecking order. So
it's a pecking order, but it's impact too. This is the final ministerial meetings generally are leading up to the big summit, right?
And you actually physically make them bigger.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. I didn't really think about that, but it does make sense. And does that translate down even in the corporate world too for experiential and things like that? So that a small brand, if you're a big brand, you have to have a big event.
True, but it's a
little different.
Yeah, it's a little different, but I also think it depends on what that message of the brand would be.
Yeah.
Recently, worked on an environmental organization that really wanted to get people to get outdoors and experience the great wilderness. But they wanted to place this environment in the middle of town, in the middle of the city, where you could sit on a rock in an environment that made you think about the outdoors and listen, put noise canceling headsets on and listen to the outdoors. And you're scaling it to what the message you and the audience you want to have.
Right. Okay. But the thing is about sparking change, though, does the person, if it's a bigger set, does he say, oh my God, we have a bigger problem, we have to solve it, and we have to be serious about it? I mean, does the president, is there some sort of like weight that happens when you're sitting in a room of the G20 summit and you're solving a problem and you have to create change?
Well, I think you're right. Taking it back to the corporate level, an impressive boardroom, you stand up a little taller in your seat, perhaps. The same thing is true about creating that impressive, large-scale environment in a summit meeting. Some of these larger summits have been in conventions. Most of them are in convention centers, and we're building out the space that we need. We think through the map in the city, the space that's there, and so because of noise cancellation, because of lots of different security requirements. These leaders, these 6 foot tall average leaders, are environments that are scenic walls that surround them are roughly 24 feet tall. That alone sets the scale. Then you add the delegations that need to be seated in that room, and you're easily a leader of one of 50 in a room of 200 in a room that's probably 200 by 200. Linear feet. It's a pretty amazing space and daunting and awe-inspiring.
It sounds like a lot of the successful execution of these events comes from having really good information and having a really good sense of the appropriateness of the why that you're pursuing. So curious if you could share some of your research techniques that you think are critical to being able to execute on that reliably.
Well, from a space planning of an environment such as a summit, you really go to the protocol, the nature of the meetings, what from a security perspective, a movement, principal movement. Those are all elements that help you lay out the space. But from a message position, it really is working very closely with the State Department, really researching what you can add to that message. I'll never forget in 2011 we did the AIPAC summit. And the final meetings were in Hawaii, and our designer went to the historical museums in Honolulu, really worked very closely with the cultural centers there to design a motif that was just a subtle piece to our execution and little moments, engineered serendipity into the space. That was just because we had to mark the place and time. Interesting.
I mean, so it's all of these sort of techniques to help spark change.
Yeah.
And it's all going back to the human things. And I have a curious question when you're talking about grand and big and thoughtful and all that, and you talk about what's happening in luxury today. Is there some connection between the luxury world and the G8 world? I mean, is it sort of like the top of the heap? And like what's going on in the world in terms of what makes people, it's like a status symbol, the G8s and the G20s. And luxury is a status symbol. Is there any commonality between them? This is not a well thought out question, but I'm just wondering if you see it or whether Alex or you see it. Do you have any thoughts on that? That like when you approach a luxury brand, which you do some luxury brands, and a G8 summit, are they looking for the same thing, that regalness or that sense of wow? Absolutely.
It's the U.S. government or that government hosting that event. In the case of a G8, in the case of a G20 Summit of the Americas, NATO, whatever it may be, it's the U.S. government or that particular government hosting that event. And hosting, it's that country hosting the world, right?
But is the U.S. brand a luxury brand at that top level? When you go into the White House, there's a luxury brand, right?
Absolutely.
And the State Department is a luxury brand for the most part. I'm trying to tie that in to see if status in governments and fits in the same ecosystem as the way we market luxury.
No,
I'm not sure. This could be a completely off-topic thing, but
no, I think there's a status level that the U.S. as a U.S. brand, as a luxury brand, as you would say, and I agree that it has to execute at a particular level. Mm-hmm. This may be just the hearsay, but we understood that the G20, President Obama's first summit that he hosted, he went to London. It was the build up for the first G20 that would have been 2008, or early in 2009 was so impressive and so amazing that President Obama agreed to host. And his directive to his team was, let's do it, but let's do it better.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And the London build-out was incredible.
Yeah. And so the building out helps. I'm trying to bring it back to sparking change. And does that impact the sparking of change? Because you're setting the stakes higher so that you have to have the responsibility to make something happen.
Yeah, for sparking changes, our job is to work very closely with the planners, the Natalie Jones and the Capricias, to understand what needs to happen in these little moments. For every summit, there's a series of dinners. There are several minister dinners as well as the leaders dinner, and those environments are environments where you spark change, where leaders are sparking change. Correct, and it's creating that environment that is conducive to conversation, is a relaxing yet formal setting, appropriate to the tone and the tenor of the room.
We're going to take a little break and come right back after this message from Hilton. So when's the big event? Hilton's here for planners with their exclusive customized meetings. Become a wow maker and save time by letting Hilton help you present an extraordinary event, one that leads to memorable and meaningful connections. Visit meetings.hilton.com and let Hilton help you. You also do a lot of brand activations and things like that.
Absolutely. Yes.
I mean, the sparking change is getting someone to buy something. Like, are there any sort of theories behind that in terms of, we're now in the sort of the festivalization of events?
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit of how that works in terms of how sparking change is getting somebody to buy something. I think.
Yes. And it's interesting for our work. Most often we're the designers working very closely with our clients, like the State Department, to come back and create the environment or propose the environment that is conducive to the message that needs to be created. In the experiential marketing space, so often our clients are the agencies. In fact, that's largely who our clients are. And so we're much more on the fulfillment side. We do have a great working relationship with a series of agencies where we are brought into the design process and a little bit more. And the sparking change really comes from, how do we create that environment that is wow, because wow is big. It's always been big, but has those surprises, those feeling moments behind it that are a little more unique and a little different. For a wow moment, it could be just if all you provide is wow, then it's still just one.
So you're saying there's a difference between a feeling moment and a wow moment.
Absolutely.
What are the feeling moments? What are examples of a feeling moment?
It's great storytelling. When you think about cliffhangers, you can't hang off the cliff for entirely. You need to have recovered it. You need your value. You need to know what you've just come through and prepare yourself for the next moment. So, and allow time to resonate what you've just experienced.
So what are some of those that you can point us to?
So in the case of, and again, working very closely with our agency client, creating the festivalization of events, creating those moments where it's impactful here. Here's the crescendos we want to build over the course of the 3 moments, the 3 days of a weekend. But it's those moments in between that people can actually say, wow, last night was cool. If you don't give them that moment and you just give them another moment, they're never going to enjoy the whole piece.
The pacing becomes important. The humanization of the pacing is what you're kind of saying. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what does the down moment look like? Like, you have this highlight of an experience, but is it the lounge?
It's a lounge. It's arts and crafts. In the case of Bud Light experience weekend, it's race car derbies in the middle of the afternoon, but maybe it's just arts and crafts. It's a moment to stand in front of a photo op. It's little breaks and steal away moments that attendees can have so that they can get back into the game. And we lay this. We'll do this in trade shows as well. We'll lay out a space where Disney does this really well, but when you lay out a floor plan, you think about what hits you first, is that impact moment. You know when you walk up to a carnival at the end of the parking lot, how much fun you're going to have. It's a different experience once you're in the carnival, but that moment, it's anticipation, it's excitement. Like your feet can't take you there fast enough. And when you can bring that to an event, it's pretty powerful. And that's what the pacing and the elements. So when you talk about big set pieces, impact there, recovery moment, and then ready for that next impact piece. It's laying out a floor plan so there's lots of impact, engineered serendipity, but spaces to resonate and relax, recover.
I think this is a really interesting point about pacing because it ties to a lot of the central themes of storytelling and effectively communicating with an audience. I'm curious, taking it contemporary, when you go to other events or when you see executions of this, what are some of the typical mistakes you feel like you see nowadays in, let's focus on pacing specifically, but like with pacing an event or storytelling an event, what are some of the typical things that you see you maybe wish you did not see?
Yeah. Well, like every event person, that you can't go to other people's events. You barely go to your own, right? I think it is pacing. It's everything comes down to budget, right? And so when you working with an organization, frequently I'll go to fundraisers, and I don't like to see budget allocated to the wrong elements, and to the wrong impact moments. If I came from nonprofit fundraising events, and so if use your dollar wisely and create those moments that are going to create impact, but that create impact at the right moment. Again, an entrance treatment, that first moments can be very, very impactful. Put your money there, because once you get into the room a little bit, it's standing in line, getting a drink, it's meeting friends. All of everything you've just installed tends to go away. And if you have further budget, then you create that next beat in the play, that next arc of the story.
So, but if you don't have budget, you just stop it? Like, do you spread the money around, or you just focus on one major thing? We had a whole session on first impressions that we've done, but is the first impression more important than the rest of the event?
No, I think there's a priority. Obviously, it's what is the guest. If you're tight on budget, what does the guest see every through the course of the evening? What's the photo takeaway? So that obviously sometimes becomes the backdrop, becomes the central feature, whatever that may be. But frame it as much as you can with that first initial moment, because if you're again, in an environment where we're really backtrack. When I came into Hargrove, the industry was like, what's your theme? Here's the props you can rent. The industry is not there anymore. If we do our job well, most attendees won't even realize we were there and that space was created. Because our success is actually in creating an environment that makes you feel good, like a great environmental design in a restaurant. That you can have, that guests can have a cocktail and have like a mixologist there, and an environment where they can exchange ideas or catch up or flirt with one another, whatever that environment allows them. But they're not thinking about the fact that there's a 16-foot tall gorillas over in the corner.
The props are not as important as they used to be.
It should never be, and it shouldn't be a theme.
Hargrove's
it's an
office.
environment. It's an environment to connect with people.
Right. Good. Let's sort of, one of the things we talk about is that event organizing, people in the event industry need to eat, drink, sleep, inspiration for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or whatever it is. What inspires you? Like, what are your personal inspirations in terms of where you get your ideas from? Where do you see? It could be in fashion. It could be in cuisine. It could be in music. It can be in, where you have your second home.
Yeah.
What are the things that drive you?
Fashion and style is definitely one of them, and where we've been, where we'll take elements of style have always been key to that. I also get excited about cleverness, and I always try to get our team to think about what's that element that you don't see on the space that could be repurposed to become a great couch. If a couch is made out of cardboard, corrugated sheets of cardboard that is comfortable, it's interesting. It's surprising. It takes you to a different place, and if it speaks to that particular event, then it's great. So it's always thinking about materials that are not necessarily the go-tos that are little surprises.
Great. Do you want to wrap us up, Alex?
So we've talked a lot in this conversation about sparking change for other people and impacted events and creating environments that are conducive to change. For you yourself, what kind of change would you want to see in the world? What kind of change, if you could leave a change through events and use events as a tool to just leave the world a bit different, what would that be for you?
It's not an easy question.
No, it's not meant to be an easy question. But you deal with lots of different types of issues. I mean, you know the power of events. So if you were able to hire yourself to solve a problem, what would it be?
It is a social change. It is the coming together of stakeholders, members of an organization that care about that mission. One of my first clients at Hargrove was a human rights campaign, and it was one of the first gay and lesbian organizations that Hargrove had ever worked for, and I was proud to bring that to Hargrove and proud to introduce that. Their mission to our company of 240 employees, and many of those employees were not connected to that message, but care now, or at least have a broader education on what that means and what it and a better understanding of the diversity of the world.
It's very interesting that you're saying that, because I didn't realize this to the extent that the idea of just doing work on an event sparks change. That the fact is that you all of a sudden get an education in something that you never even thought you would care about.
No, absolutely. And this is very true about, in the case of like human rights campaign, because, again, of a company of 240 employees, we have folks, some executives who are a little more
conservative.
Yeah, a little more observant, a little more exposed to urban environments, where we also have a crews of people who are not necessarily, and would, prior to working on these projects, would have said they never knew someone who was gay. And I had a project manager come to me after he had done 3 or 4 of the projects, and he said, I didn't know anything about gay people, and I love working on these projects and really support the mission. And that's sparking change.
So that is sparking change.
Yes, and both from the everyone who works at Hargrove and understands the mission of HRC, to the attendees that are there at that event, to the guests that we invite to that event. They maybe have a reason to be at the event, but they're enlightened by the message that I'd like to say that we help set the stage for.
On that note, that's a great way to end. Thank you so much.
All right, David, we're back at our podcast studio, and it was interesting to listen to him talk about event design as it relates to some of these mega events with important people, and how design can really set the tone for what happens and the agenda, and getting people in the right frame of mind to work together to accomplish things.
When I was working with Commercia Marshall, who's the chief of protocol at the State Department under the Obama administration, she always talked about how we're setting the table for diplomacy, and that is exactly what the idea of decor and design of an event is, to make it so people can talk to each other and accomplish big, important tasks.
Mm-hmm. I also liked Alex's question about research techniques before moving forward on design and production. Sometimes it's a gut thing, the direction you want to go or have a big idea, but when you have a lot at stake, you have to have your facts first, whether that's on protocol or other subjects.
Absolutely. I mean, when you go into the Hargrove studios and the Hargrove facilities, they spend a lot of time not only on strategy, but on the research and on how things are done, and also how things are done over the years and how they can improve them year after year. I mean, nothing like a big G8 for a lot of people standing around the room saying, how could we do this better? I mean, that's one of the most important things, because there's so many people, there's so many eyes watching what you're doing. It's a little intimidating, a lot intimidating, let's say.
Yeah.
So Beth, what else is going on at BizBash?
Well, keeping it in Washington, we published our story on the parties surrounding the White House Correspondents Association weekend.
Still recovering.
Yeah, it was smaller this year, and I think that's kind of we've seen a pulling back in some ways of the hoopla, the celebrity of events, fewer media brands, but those who are there are making a big splash and are committed to showcasing what their journalists do to cover the administration. So we had a lot of great brands doing fun themes and showing off, what they're capable of. I always say it's a weekend for media brands to activate and market themselves for the work that they do.
And they have upped their game a lot, from potato chips in the lounges to really thoughtful gatherings. Even though they don't have the celebrity glitz that they had, the legacy of those days are that the level of production and the level of events have increased, and they have not gone back down.
Yeah, great point.
So, Beth, what we'd like to do when we end our podcast is thank all the people that are involved in what we're doing. Claire Hoffman, who handles our editorial duties, and Rebecca Pappas, who is in charge of getting it out to you, the listeners. And, of course, Dave Nelson, our producer, who puts it all together. So with that said, what do we say now, Beth?
Gather on.
Gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter @GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on.